Talking Jo-won Beck recalled that, when he was a gross-ah child, he had been taught by a teacher named Eun-young Seo. She had always taken the time to explain every concept to him until he understood it completely. As the years passed, he had become deeply attached to her, and often found himself simping for his teacher. Many years later, after growing up, he realized that those emotions had only been youthful daydreams. Waking from yet another dream about her, he wondered why he kept dreaming about things that had never actually happened. While he was lost in those thoughts, his phone suddenly rang. After introducing himself to the caller, he confirmed that he was available the following day. Meanwhile, a young woman named Heron was walking around her room wearing a bathrobe. Looking at the untidy room around her, she thought that she really should clean it up. Just then, the doorbell rang, making her wonder who could be visiting at that hour. She walked over and opened the door, only to find Jo-won standing outside. Introducing himself politely, he mentioned that he had heard she was looking for a private tutor. Embarrassed by her appearance, Heron quickly apologized, explaining that she usually dressed comfortably whenever she was at home. She then invited him inside. After changing into proper clothes, the two of them sat together with cups of tea and began talking. During their conversation, Heron explained that she was planning to study abroad, but her English skills were very weak. Jo-won assumed that she must already be attending college and asked which university she was planning to enroll in. Heron casually replied that it was just an ordinary, little-known school. She then commented that he must have graduated from a prestigious university before asking whether he had majored in English literature. Jo-won confirmed that he had. However, Heron remarked that having a degree and being able to teach effectively were two completely different things. Jo-won calmly agreed, although inwardly he thought that she looked much younger than him despite having quite a terrible attitude. Hoping to reassure her, he explained that he himself had once studied under an excellent private tutor. Thanks to her guidance, he had managed to enter a good university, and over time he had naturally learned many of her teaching methods as well. At that moment, Harin's mother entered the room. Smiling as she noticed Jo-won, she remarked that he had already arrived and kindly asked him to take good care of Heron. Heron immediately became annoyed by her mother's comment, pointing out that they had not even decided whether he would become her tutor yet. Curious, her mother then asked for his name. As soon as Jo-won introduced himself, she froze in surprise, instantly recognizing him. Harin looked back and forth between the two of them in confusion, before asking whether her mother actually knew him. At the same moment, Jo-won also recognized her. She was none other than his beloved former tutor, Eun-young Seo. Eun-young smiled warmly and admitted that she could hardly believe they were meeting again under such unexpected circumstances. She mentioned that she had heard his business had not been doing well, which was why he had taken on private tutoring as a part-time job. Jo-won honestly admitted that it was true. Eun-young then comforted him by explaining that she herself had also worked as a private tutor years ago when her husband's business had been struggling financially. Hearing that reminded Jo-won of the past, and he confessed that he truly missed those days. Watching the conversation unfold, Heron interrupted them by reminding both of them that they were actually there to find her a new tutor. She suggested that they could catch up another time because anyone watching them might mistakenly assume that two former lovers had reunited. Hearing her remark, Jo-won quietly looked at Eun-young and thought that she had hardly changed at all. In fact, she looked even more attractive than many younger women. Since he had already dreamed about her that very morning, seeing her again only made his heart race even faster. Eun-young noticed his unusual excitement and silently wondered why he seemed so flustered. Soon afterward, Heron opened the door and suggested to her mother that they should hold the trial lesson at a nearby cafe instead. Jo-won agreed with the idea, and he left the house together with Harin for the trial class. After they had departed, Eun-young remained at home washing the dishes. While quietly finishing the household chores, she found herself thinking that she still could not believe they had met again after all those years. She wondered whether Jo-won would be able to teach Heron well. Remembering how intelligent he had always been as a child, she sincerely hoped that her daughter would like him, because she personally felt very comfortable entrusting Heron's education to him. While she was still occupied with those thoughts, the front door opened and her husband returned home. Surprised to see him at that hour, Eun-young remarked that it was unusual for him to be home so early. He explained that he had suddenly been assigned to a last-minute business trip and would not be returning home for the next few days. Before leaving, he suggested that they should spend some time exercising together, and Eun-young happily agreed to join him for the flexibility training. After completing Jo-won's initial trial lesson, Heron admitted that she wanted him to become her private tutor. She told him that he taught much better than she had expected, and suggested that he should also share the good news with her mother. She then mentioned that she had plans to meet one of her friends nearby, which was why she would be leaving. Jo-won agreed without any objection, although he quietly realized that this was probably the reason she had wanted to hold the trial lesson at the cafe in the first place. After leaving the cafe, Jo-won began walking toward Eun-young's home. Along the way, he thought that she might be happy if he personally told her that he had been chosen as Harin's tutor. Since he assumed that she was probably alone at home, he decided to stop by and share the news with her himself. As he approached the apartment, he noticed that the front door had been left slightly open. Curious, he carefully peeked inside. The moment he looked into the apartment, he was completely taken by surprise. Standing inside, he saw Eun-young spending time with her husband, as the two of them were in the middle of a core training session together. After completing her stretching session, Eun-young informed her husband that she had finally found a new tutor for Haran. After hearing the news, he calmly replied that it sounded fine. At the same time, Jo-won was standing quietly outside the apartment, unintentionally overhearing their conversation through the slightly open door. As he realized that he had remained there for far too long, he became anxious and thought that he needed to leave immediately before anyone noticed his presence or caught him standing outside. Just as Eun-young was about to close the front door, her husband suddenly noticed that something was strange. He mentioned that he clearly remembered closing the door himself when he had entered the apartment earlier, yet it was somehow standing open again. Assuming that there must be something wrong with the door lock, he asked Eun-young to call someone to repair it as soon as possible. Eun-young simply agreed with his suggestion. Shortly afterward, her husband gathered his belongings and left the apartment to head off on his business trip. After seeing her husband leave, Eun-young was about to return inside when she noticed a wallet lying on the ground just outside the apartment. She bent down to pick it up and carefully looked at it for a moment, wondering who it could possibly belong to and how it had ended up there. Meanwhile, Jo-won was walking down the street while thinking to himself that he had rushed straight toward the bus stop without even realizing how quickly he had left the apartment building. He reminded himself that he should catch the next bus before it arrived. However, as he casually reached into his pocket to check his belongings, his expression immediately changed. He searched through his pockets once again, only to realize that his wallet was nowhere to be found. The sudden discovery left him completely shocked, and he instantly understood that he must have dropped it somewhere along the way. Before he could even think about where he had lost it, his phone suddenly began to ring. As soon as he answered the call, he heard Eun-young's voice on the other end. She informed him that she had found a wallet and that it contained what looked like one of his old intern business cards. The moment he heard those words, he immediately realized that he had accidentally dropped his wallet outside her apartment. Without wasting another second, he quickly told her that he would come over right away since he was already nearby. As he hurried back toward the apartment, he could not help but worry to himself, hoping that Eun-young had not realized that he had secretly been watching her and her husband from outside. Meanwhile, Eun-young quietly smiled to herself while holding the wallet. She found herself thinking that Jo-won was still just as clumsy as he had always been, and that some of his old habits had clearly never changed. As she continued holding the wallet, her curiosity slowly grew. She wondered whether there might be anything else inside besides his business card. Unable to resist her curiosity, she carefully opened the wallet. The moment she looked inside, she was surprised to find a small photograph of a young girl. She stared at it for a brief moment, wondering who the girl could possibly be and what kind of relationship she had with Jo-won. Curious to know more, Eun-young slowly reached for the photograph, intending to take a closer look at it. However, before she even had the chance to examine the picture properly, the sound of the door interrupted her as Jo-won had already arrived at her home. Jo-won gratefully accepted his wallet after Eun-young handed it back to him. Since he was already there, Eun-young suggested that they should have another cup of tea together before he left. Jo-won politely agreed to her suggestion, and Eun-young went into the kitchen to prepare the tea. A short while later, she returned carrying the tea and some snacks. As she approached the table, her eyes suddenly fell upon one of her gym clothings that had accidentally been left on the floor near where Jo-won was sitting. The unexpected sight instantly filled her with embarrassment, and she desperately hoped that he had not noticed it. Feeling flustered and unable to think clearly because of her embarrassment, she accidentally lost her balance while walking toward him. As a result, she stumbled forward, causing the tea to spill all over Jo-won. Realizing that the hot tea had spilled all over Jo-won, Eun-young immediately rushed toward him and quickly removed his soaked gym outfit, explaining that if she did not take it off right away, he could end up getting burned. Feeling extremely guilty about the accident, she repeatedly apologized, saying that she had only wanted to treat him to a cup of tea and had never expected something like this to happen. Jo-won prepared to leave, but Eun-young became upset when she saw that his clothes were still stained with tea. She insisted that she would wash them for him if he could just give her a little time. After saying that, she went into the bathroom and returned with an extra pair of pants. Handing them to Jo-won, she explained that they belonged to her husband and were simply his gym pants. She told Jo-won to wear them home since her husband would be away on a business trip for the next few days. After leaving Eun-young's house, Jo-won was still unable to process everything that had happened. He found himself wondering how such an ordinary visit had turned into such an awkward situation. As he continued walking down the street, he unexpectedly bumped into Haran. She was surprised to see him and wondered why he had not gone home yet. At that moment, Haran's friend, Aj, noticed Jo-won and teasingly pointed out that Haran seemed to have been staring at him. Haran immediately denied it, insisting that it was not true. However, her friend reminded her that she had previously been interested in Sung-chan and mentioned that he was already popular with many girls at school, adding that Haran had been one of the girls who liked him as well. Haran admitted that she had only been a little interested in him. Hearing that, her friend warned her that Sung-chan did not have a very good reputation when it came to girls, and advised her to be careful around him. Later that night, Eun-young found herself becoming increasingly worried because Haran had still not returned home. She thought that Haran wandered around every day, but it was getting much later than usual. As she sat alone, her thoughts unexpectedly drifted back to Jo-won. She reflected on how different he seemed now compared to the last time she had met him. She remembered that he had once been her student, yet he had now grown into a completely mature young man. Realizing where her thoughts were going, she immediately tried to stop herself. She told herself that she should drink a glass of cold water and clear her mind because there was no point in dwelling on such thoughts. She blamed the confusion on her husband, thinking that he had suddenly pushed her into a daily private PT session without any warning, and then left on a business trip immediately afterward. Meanwhile, Jo-won was at a hotel with his colleague Ye-won. The two of them were sitting together while having drinks. Ye-won jokingly remarked that she knew he had probably invited her there because of their gym session. However, Jo-won denied it and sincerely told her that he genuinely valued her because of all the hard work she had done. Smiling at his response, Ye-won playfully asked whether that meant she was the perfect partner for him. She then suggested that they should start doing their private PT sessions on a regular basis. After considering her suggestion, Jo-won agreed to it. The next morning, Jo-won received a phone call, and on the other end was Haran, who reminded him that he had completely forgotten about his student. She complained that he had not contacted her at all, before telling him that she wanted him to start coming to her house from that very day because she was officially asking him to become her tutor. Hearing her words, Jo-won simply agreed. After ending the call, he got himself ready and left for her house. As he made his way there, he quietly reflected that at least he would not have to worry about his living expenses for a while now that he had secured a tutoring job. After arriving at Haran's house, Jo-won was greeted with a warm welcome from both Haran and Eun-young. Haran happily welcomed him inside, as if she had been waiting for his arrival, while Eun-young also greeted him with a smile. However, Haran soon found herself feeling puzzled. The previous day, Jo-won and Eun-young had seemed genuinely happy to see each other, yet today they were acting strangely awkward around one another. Their expressions and behavior felt unusually stiff, making Haran wonder why the atmosphere between them had suddenly become so uncomfortable. While looking at Eun-young, Jo-won quietly reminded her that he wanted his pants back. The moment those words left his mouth, Eun-young became visibly flustered. She immediately signaled for him to lower his voice before quickly grabbing his hand. Without giving him a chance to say anything else, she turned toward Haran and calmly told her that they needed to talk for just a moment. She asked Haran to go ahead and prepare herself for the tutoring session while they finished their brief conversation. After leading Jo-won into another room, Eun-young quickly explained that he should never mention something like that so openly, because anyone who overheard them could easily misunderstand the situation. She assured him that she had not forgotten about his clothes and promised that she would secretly hand them back after the tutoring session was over. She told him to collect them quietly before leaving so that nobody would get the wrong impression. While waiting in the room, Jo-won casually looked around and noticed a framed wedding photograph displayed nearby. He quietly stared at the picture for a few moments before thinking to himself that Eun-young really seemed to share a close relationship with her husband. After seeing the two of them together the previous day and now looking at their wedding photograph, he could tell that they appeared to be a happily married couple. A short while later, Jo-won and Harin left the house together and headed toward the cafe for their tutoring session. As they walked, Harin questioned why they had come all the way back to the cafe again. She commented that she could not understand the reason because they could have simply studied at home instead. Jo-won listened to her without revealing the truth, while silently thinking that the real reason was because he needed to stop by Eun-young's house secretly later, making the cafe a much more convenient place for their lesson. As the tutoring session continued, Haran gradually became bored. She secretly observed Jo-won while thinking that she could tell just by looking at him that he was not an entertaining person at all. She found herself wishing that Sung-chan had been sitting across from her instead. At the same time, she remembered what one of her friends had told her about Sung-chan's reputation with girls. Although his reputation apparently was not very good, she still could not stop thinking about him. Still staring at Jo-won, Haran suddenly asked whether it was really that difficult for men to control their desires during mobility training. Jo-won was caught off guard by such an unexpected question. He immediately reminded her that they were in the middle of a tutoring session and that she should not be asking him questions like that while they were supposed to be studying. Harin simply listened to his response, but her thoughts had already wandered elsewhere as she found herself wondering what Sung-chan might be doing at that exact moment. Meanwhile, Jo-won had absolutely no idea who Sung-chan even was, nor did he realize that Harin had been thinking about someone else the entire time. Meanwhile, Sung-chan was spending time with Haran's friend, Seong-yi, as the two of them were having a relaxing stretch routine. During their conversation, Sung-chan casually mentioned that he wanted to become friends with the other girl whom Seong-yi had been spending time with recently. The moment she realized that he was talking about Harin, Song Yi immediately became frustrated. She firmly warned him not to even talk about Harin because she was an innocent girl, making it clear that she did not want him getting involved with her. On the other side, Harin eventually finished her tutoring session with Jo Won. After the lesson came to an end, she mentioned that she already had plans for the rest of the day. Before leaving, she commented that although the tutoring session had not been particularly fun, she had still understood and absorbed everything very well. She then told Jo Won that she would see him next time before leaving the cafe. Once Harin had gone, Jo Won quietly thought to himself that this was the perfect opportunity to visit Yoon. Without wasting any more time, he headed straight toward her house. After arriving outside, he knocked on the door, and a few moments later, Yoon opened it. The instant she appeared before him, Jo Won was surprised to see that she was sweating. Noticing the surprised expression on his face, Yoon quickly explained that she had rushed out of the shower as soon as she heard someone at the door. She then looked at him with a confused expression and asked whether he was not supposed to be in the middle of Harin's tutoring session. Jo Won explained that they had managed to get through the study material much faster than he had expected because Harin understood new concepts very quickly and learned things without much difficulty. After hearing his explanation, Yoon accepted his answer and invited him inside, telling him that she would finally return his clothes. As she turned around to walk further into the house, her wet feet suddenly slipped on the water that had been left on the floor after her shower. Before she could completely lose her balance and fall, Jo Won quickly reached out and caught her, supporting her body just in time and helping her regain her balance. The next moment, Jo Won and Eun ended up on the floor after catching each other during the fall. Jo Won immediately looked at her with concern and asked whether she was all right. Eun assured him that she was completely fine. Feeling embarrassed about the situation, Jo Won quickly apologized for falling on top of her. Eun calmly explained that she had rushed out of the shower the moment she heard the doorbell, which was why she had been in such a hurry and accidentally slipped. She then told him that she would go and change into something more appropriate before coming back. With her face slightly flushed from embarrassment, she hurried into her room. Meanwhile, Jo Won remained seated on the couch in the living room, patiently waiting for her to return. A few moments later, Eun came back, carrying his wallet in her hands. Although she had just gone through such an awkward incident, she acted as though nothing unusual had happened. She calmly handed the wallet back to him and told him to take good care of it because it looked as though there was something very precious inside. She casually mentioned that she had noticed what appeared to be a photograph tucked inside the wallet. Hearing that, Jo Won immediately asked whether she had looked at the photograph. Eun quickly clarified that she had not taken it out or looked at it closely. She had only noticed that there seemed to be a picture inside the wallet. Curious, she then asked whether the person in the photograph was his girlfriend. Jo Won immediately denied it, explaining that he did not have a girlfriend. Eun smiled slightly before teasing him that perhaps it was someone he secretly had a crush on. Before Jo Won could respond or explain himself any further, he awkwardly interrupted the conversation by saying that he should get going. Without answering her question, he quickly left the house. After leaving, Jo Won felt extremely embarrassed about everything that had happened. As he walked toward the bus stop, he could not stop replaying the incident in his mind. He quietly thought that if Eun had noticed how flustered he had become, it would have been unbelievably embarrassing. While standing at the bus stop waiting for the bus, he slowly took out the photograph from inside his wallet. Looking at the picture, he reflected that although Eun had changed a great deal since they were younger, she still possessed the same breathtaking beauty that had always remained with her. Completely absorbed in his memories, he continued staring at the photograph without paying attention to his surroundings. Lost in those thoughts, Jo Won accidentally reached out and touched another woman nearby. The woman immediately turned around, and without giving him any opportunity to explain himself, she slapped him across the face because she believed that he had deliberately harassed her. Shocked by what had just happened, Jo Won repeatedly apologized and insisted that it had been an accident. However, the woman loudly demanded that someone call the police. The people nearby quickly surrounded Jo Won, assuming he had done something wrong, and restrained him before taking him to the police station. Throughout the entire ordeal, Jo Won continuously insisted that he was completely innocent and that he had never intended to touch her on purpose. Once they arrived at the police station, the officer began questioning both of them. He first asked for the woman's name, but instead of answering the intended question, she immediately introduced herself as Heeman Baek. The officer clarified that he had actually been asking for Jo Won's name rather than hers before continuing the questioning. After listening to Heeman's accusations, the police officer explained that there was not enough evidence to immediately accept her claims and that they would first have to investigate the situation properly. The officers then began questioning Jo Won in detail. After asking for his personal information, one of the officers inquired about his occupation. Jo Won honestly admitted that he was currently unemployed. The officer continued asking him all the necessary questions regarding his background before pointing out that he did not have a stable social status. He then asked whether Jo Won had anyone who could verify his identity or testify about his character. Jo Won sighed before explaining that he lived alone and had not kept in regular contact with any of his friends since graduating from college. He once again insisted that everything had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. After thinking for a moment, he admitted that if the police truly required someone to vouch for him, there was only one person he could possibly contact because she was someone he saw quite often. Having no other choice, he called his landlady and politely asked whether she could come to the police station. A short while later, his landlady arrived at the station. As soon as she saw Juan, she jokingly remarked that she could not believe the two of them were meeting in a place like the police station. The officer then asked about her relationship with Juan. She explained that she was his landlady and that she lived next door to him. Hearing that, the officer admitted that when Juan had said his landlady was coming, he had imagined an older man instead. Smiling, she explained that she was indeed the landlady because her husband had been much older than her and had passed away, leaving the property under her care. She then looked at the officer and asked whether she had really been called all the way there just to hear an accusation that Juan had harassed another woman. She firmly stated that as his landlady, she frequently crossed paths with him because they lived right next to each other. Based on everything she had observed over time, Juan was a reliable and honest young man who had never behaved suspiciously or shown any signs of being the type of person who would harass women. After hearing her testimony, the police officer turned toward Heman and explained that they currently had no evidence other than her personal statement. He then asked whether she had anyone who could support her version of events or testify as a witness. Heman reluctantly admitted that nobody from the bus stop had come with her and that she did not have any witnesses. Since there was no concrete evidence proving either side's claims, the officer concluded that everyone was free to go home for the time being. He assured them that the police would continue searching for any possible witnesses before making a final decision. As everyone prepared to leave the station, Heman glared at Juan and warned him that the matter was far from over. She confidently declared that the moment a witness appeared, he would be finished. Juan calmly replied that if no witness ever came forward, then she should come back and apologize to him instead. After thinking for a moment, Heman agreed. She then asked for his phone number, explaining that she would need it either to apologize later if she had been mistaken or to contact him so they could discuss a settlement if necessary. After exchanging contact information, she finally left the police station. Watching her leave, Juan's landlady smiled and commented that Heman was actually a very pretty woman. She jokingly added that it was not such a bad thing that he had ended up getting her phone number. She then laughed while saying that once the misunderstanding was cleared up, perhaps he could even work out with her someday. Before Juan could react, she quickly admitted that she was only teasing him. The two of them then walked back toward their apartment building together. As they entered the building, the landlady reminded Juan that coming all the way to the police station for him had not been a free favor. She jokingly told him to consider it a debt that he now owed her. Hearing that, Juan could only sigh to himself, thinking that it felt as though he had somehow ended up dealing with two troublesome women at the same time. Later that night, Hareen finally returned home. As soon as she entered the house, Eunyoung opened the door and gently scolded her for coming home late, reminding her that she had asked her to return earlier because she was always worried while waiting for her. She then told Haran to take a shower before going to bed. Haran simply acknowledged her mother's words before heading straight to her room. After Haran disappeared into her room, Eunyoung remained standing quietly by herself. She slowly reflected that, for the first time in quite a while, sleeping alone made the house feel strangely empty. With those lonely thoughts lingering in her mind, she realized that the only thing she could do now was continue with her usual solo private night stretch. Later that night, Juan returned to his apartment and got ready to sleep. However, the moment he lay down on his bed, his thoughts drifted back to Eunyoung. Realizing that sleep was not going to come easily, he decided to distract himself. He took out his phone, started watching some wholesome gym vids for various exercises, and began training himself of the techniques he's seen at home. Meanwhile, in the apartment next door, his landlady was awake in her own room. She quietly reflected that the nights always felt especially lonely whenever she happened to wake up in the middle of the night. She thought to herself that she did not even have the motivation to meet a new man anytime soon, despite living by herself. While sitting alone with those thoughts, she suddenly heard unusual noises coming from Juan's apartment. After hearing the sounds from next door, she eventually decided to spend the rest of the night initiating her self-care makeup routine as well. The following day, Juan finally woke up in the afternoon. As soon as he looked at the time, he was shocked that he had slept through almost the entire afternoon. He could hardly believe how long he had been asleep. Quickly getting out of bed, he reminded himself that he still needed to prepare the study materials for Haran's tutoring session the following day. Thinking that the library would be the best place to study without distractions, he got himself ready and left his apartment. After arriving at the library, Juan spent some time preparing for the upcoming tutoring session. Once he had studied for a while, he decided to take a short break and stepped outside the library. While standing outside, he happened to notice Haran nearby. She was not alone, as she was with another young man whom Juan had never seen before. The sight immediately caught his attention. At the same time, Haran was happily spending time with Sungchan. She was clearly delighted that the two of them were finally alone together. Smiling brightly, she told him that she was heading to the library and asked whether he wanted to come along with her. However, as they walked inside, Haran quietly questioned her own decision. She wondered why she had invited him to the library in the first place, since it was supposed to be a quiet place where they could not even have a proper conversation. After entering the library, Sungchan casually told Haran that the books she was looking for were located in another section of the building. Without waiting for her response, he gently grabbed her and led her toward the shelves where those books were supposedly kept. In reality, he simply wanted an excuse to spend more time alone with her. After reaching the section, he began helping her search through the shelves, pretending to look for the books she needed. As they searched together, Sungchan gradually moved closer to Haran, intentionally trying to reduce the distance between them and tease her. At that exact moment, Jo-won entered the same section of the library. The instant he saw the way Sungchan was behaving around Harin, he immediately sensed what Sungchan's intentions were. Watching the situation unfold, Jo-won quietly concluded that it looked as though Harin might be in trouble. Without hesitating any longer, Jo-won walked over to them and greeted both Harin and Sungchan. His sudden appearance completely interrupted the atmosphere between the two. Harin looked surprised to see him there and immediately asked what he was doing at the library. Jo-won calmly explained that he had come to prepare the materials for her tutoring session the following day and had simply happened to run into her while he was there. Sungchan instantly realized that the moment he had been trying to create had been completely ruined by Jo-won's unexpected arrival. Seeing that there was no longer any opportunity to continue what he had been planning, he casually excused himself by saying that he suddenly had something urgent to take care of. Without lingering any longer, he turned around and left the library. Watching Sungchan walk away, Jo-won felt satisfied with what had happened. He quietly thought to himself that he had just protected his student from someone like Sungchan. Believing that he had done Harin a favor, he confidently remarked that she should actually be thanking him. However, instead of appreciating his actions, Harin became extremely angry after hearing those words. Without saying anything else, she turned around and walked away, leaving Jo-won standing there by himself. Harin raised her voice at Jo-won, reminding him that they were in a library and telling him that she was not grateful to him for anything he had done. Before she could continue speaking, Jo-won suddenly noticed that she was walking backward without paying attention to her surroundings. He immediately warned her to look behind because she was just about to crash into one of the bookshelves. Startled by his warning, Harin instinctively turned around, but she had already lost her balance. Without wasting a moment, Jo-won quickly reached out and caught her before she could fall, supporting her in his arms. The unexpected contact instantly made Harin feel embarrassed, and she froze for a brief moment as she realized how close they had become. Jo-won then apologized for what had happened, explaining that the entire situation had only occurred because of her carelessness. Their loud exchange and the sudden commotion attracted the attention of everyone else inside the library. One by one, the people nearby stopped what they were doing and turned their heads to look at the two of them, making the atmosphere even more awkward. Feeling embarrassed by the stares they were receiving, Harin regained her composure and remarked that she was simply going to let the matter slide because they were in a library and she did not want to create an even bigger scene. Jo-won remained standing where he was, silently watching her as she walked away. Deep down, he could not help thinking that she certainly had quite an attitude. He reflected that he had never realized she could make such expressive and intimidating facial expressions before. As he continued thinking about her behavior, he suddenly noticed just how similar she was to Eun-young. The resemblance was not only in her appearance but also in the way she reacted and expressed herself. He concluded that it was only natural because they were mother and daughter. Later that night, while Eun-young was quietly having dinner at home by herself, Harin returned home after spending time outside. As soon as she saw her daughter walk in, Eun-young looked at her with surprise and reminded her that she had said she was going to have dinner before coming home. She then glanced at the nearly empty rice pot and explained that there was not enough rice left for another serving. She added that if Harin wanted to eat, she would have to prepare something else for her instead. However, Harin simply replied that she was not hungry and had no intention of eating anything. Hearing those words, Eun-young became even more surprised because it was unlike Harin to skip dinner. Looking at her with concern, she remarked that something must have happened since Harin had not skipped a meal in such a long time. Harin slowly turned toward her mother before saying that there was actually something she wanted to ask. After hesitating for a moment, she asked how Eun-young had managed to convince her father to marry her. She then added that perhaps asking such a question was pointless because Eun-young was so boring that she was hardly someone who could be used as a reference when it came to relationships. Almost immediately after saying those words, Harin shook her head and dismissed the topic herself, remarking that it had been a silly question in the first place. Without waiting for a response, she turned around and headed straight to her room, leaving Eun-young standing there in confusion. After giving the matter some thought, Eun-young became worried about Harin's unusual behavior. She eventually walked to her daughter's room, entered quietly, and gently asked whether Harin had started seeing someone. Haran looked at her mother for a moment before admitting that perhaps it was all right to tell her the truth. She explained that she was not actually dating anyone yet, but there was a guy she had recently become somewhat interested in. She described him as very handsome and casually admitted that appearance mattered a lot to her. She continued by explaining that the biggest problem was that the man was extremely popular because of his good looks, making him someone who attracted attention wherever he went. Haran then recalled that they had gone to the library together earlier that day. During their time there, she felt that the man had been trying to get closer to her. Although she initially wanted to deny it, she honestly admitted that she had not completely hated his attempts to get close. Feeling slightly embarrassed by her own confession, she quickly added that she was already grown up and capable of taking care of herself, so there was no need for anyone to worry about her. After quietly listening to everything Haran had said, Yoon responded calmly. She acknowledged that it was Haran's body and ultimately her own choice to make. However, she confessed that she could not ignore the uneasy feeling she had about the man Haran was describing. She admitted that she had a bad feeling about him for reasons she could not fully explain. Haran immediately became frustrated after hearing those words. She complained that she simply did not understand why everyone kept interfering in her personal life and questioning her decisions. Feeling increasingly embarrassed that she had shared so much with her mother, she asked Eun to leave her room. She added that it was not even as though Eun had met the man, so there was no point in discussing him any further. She told her mother to forget everything she had just said. Eun quietly left Haran's room without arguing any further. As she walked away, she reflected on the entire conversation and blamed herself for the way things had turned out. She thought that she had been treating Harin too much like a friend instead of acting like a proper mother, and now Harin had started responding to her in the same casual manner. She decided that once her husband returned home, she would ask him to scold Haran properly and remind her how she should speak to her parents. As she continued thinking, she suddenly remembered that her husband was scheduled to return the following day. The thought immediately brightened her mood, and she decided that she would prepare something nourishing and energizing for him to eat when he came home the next day. Meanwhile, at a hotel, Eun husband was spending his time participating in a flexibility training with his colleague, Yeon. Eun was just about to get into bed that night while thinking to herself that she would have to sleep alone the following day. Just then, the sound of a message notification interrupted her thoughts. She picked up her phone and noticed that the message was from Joan. In his message, he was asking her to remind Haran about their tutoring session that was scheduled for the following day. Seeing his request surprised her a little, so she immediately wondered why he was asking her, instead of simply contacting Haran himself. Curious about his reason, she sent him a reply and asked why he was not reminding Haran personally. Joan explained that ever since the recent incident, he still did not feel completely comfortable talking to Haran directly, so he found it easier to ask Eun to pass the message along instead. After reading his explanation, Eun found herself thinking about him for a moment, and her mind gradually drifted back to memories from many years ago. She remembered the time when Joan had been much younger. Back then, she had always been incredibly proud of him because he consistently earned excellent grades in school. She could still remember how hardworking and responsible he had been. Whenever she had offered to reward him for doing so well, he would always politely refuse and tell her that he did not need any reward from her. Recalling those memories made her wonder if perhaps he had not liked her very much back then. However, she quickly shook that thought away and convinced herself that his behavior had simply been the typical reaction of an 18-year-old boy who was naturally shy and awkward whenever she offered him something. She then began amusing herself with another thought, remembering how beautiful she had been when she was younger. She smiled to herself as she confidently thought that she was still in her prime and had not lost her charm at all. As those thoughts filled her mind, she happened to look at her own reflection in the mirror. She paused for a moment, carefully admiring herself from head to toe before smiling with quiet satisfaction at what she saw. The following day, Joan left his home early and headed toward Haran's house for the tutoring session. Throughout the walk, his thoughts repeatedly wandered to Eun. He found himself thinking that she would probably look just as beautiful as she had the previous times he had seen her. The mere thought of meeting her again made him remind himself that he needed to stay calm and act naturally. He quietly told himself that he had to control his emotions and behave normally around her, no matter how attractive she looked. Even though it was still earlier than the scheduled tutoring time, he had already arrived outside Haran's house. As he stood near the entrance, he immediately noticed that the broken outer door had still not been repaired. Looking at it, he remembered that it had been broken before as well. Since the door was already damaged and open, he thought that there was no point in waiting outside, so he decided that he should simply walk inside. At that very moment, Eun was inside the house, wearing her yoga outfit while practicing yoga. She was completely focused on her exercises until she suddenly realized that Joan had arrived. The moment she became aware of his presence, she instinctively looked down at the clothes she was wearing and immediately thought that she could not possibly greet him while dressed like that. She felt slightly embarrassed because she was still in her yoga clothes rather than her usual outfit. However, she quickly realized that she did not really have another option since he was probably already waiting for her. Trying not to overthink the situation, She told herself that she simply needed to act naturally and not make the situation awkward. With that in mind, she walked toward the entrance, opened the door with a calm smile, warmly greeted Joan, and politely invited him to come inside. As she welcomed him into the house, she continued reminding herself to remain as natural as possible so that her embarrassment would not become obvious. Once he stepped inside, she politely asked him whether he would like to have something to drink before the tutoring session began. Joan, however, gently declined her offer. She walked into the kitchen, prepared a plate of freshly cut fruit, and brought it back to him. As she carefully placed the plate in front of him, her hand accidentally brushed against his for a brief moment. The unexpected touch caught her completely off guard, causing her to freeze for an instant. She immediately became embarrassed and quietly pulled her hand back, trying her best to hide her flustered expression and act as though nothing had happened. At that very moment, Heron entered the house and noticed Joan sitting there with the plate of fruit in front of him. Looking at him, she questioned why he was still sitting there instead of beginning the lesson. She remarked that he did not have time to sit around eating fruit and reminded him that they should already be starting their tutoring session. Before Joan could respond, Yoon-young stepped in and explained that he would be tutoring Harin in her room that day. Joan simply nodded in agreement, quietly replied that it was fine, and then followed Harin toward her room so they could begin the lesson. Once they had settled into the room, Joan seemed as though he wanted to bring up what had happened the previous day. He hesitated for a moment, preparing to speak, but before he could say anything, Harin interrupted him. She firmly reminded him that he was there to tutor her, and that they should focus only on studying instead of discussing unrelated matters. Hearing her response, Joan silently concluded that she probably did not want to talk about the incident from the previous day. Respecting her wishes, he decided not to mention it again, and immediately shifted his attention back to the lesson, beginning to teach her as planned. As the tutoring session continued, Harin suddenly asked him whether he had ever liked someone who was older than him. The unexpected question caught Joan by surprise, and he looked at her with a puzzled expression before commenting that asking such a question during a tutoring session felt rather awkward. Harin quickly laughed it off and told him that she was only joking. She explained that she had merely been using the question as an example for the type of sentence they had just started studying, and insisted that he should not take it seriously. Accepting her explanation, Joan did not think much more about it, and calmly resumed the lesson. Sometime later, while they were still studying together, Harin mentioned that she had previously told him about wanting to study abroad. However, she admitted that she had recently changed her mind and no longer wanted to leave Korea. Curious about her sudden change of heart, Joan asked whether it was really that difficult for her to leave Korea behind. He then wondered if her decision had something to do with the older man she had mentioned before. Speaking honestly, he remarked that, from a man's perspective, that person did not seem like a very good man. Hearing his opinion, Harin immediately became suspicious. She asked why he seemed so interested in the matter, pointing out that he had also shown interest the last time they had talked about that man. She teasingly remarked that something about his behavior seemed rather suspicious. Joan quickly denied her assumption, telling her that she was completely misunderstanding him. He insisted that she was being overly imaginative, and firmly stated that he was not interested in a girl like her at all. He even bluntly added that he would not accept her even if she threw herself at him. The harshness of his words immediately embarrassed Harin. Her confident expression disappeared, and she lowered her head before tears slowly began filling her eyes. Unable to hold them back, she started crying. Seeing her reaction, Joan instantly realized that he had spoken far too harshly. Feeling guilty, he immediately apologized to her. Through her tears, Harin replied that she already knew she was not attractive. She sadly admitted that Sungchan had made her feel that way before, and now Joan's words had made her feel exactly the same once again. Joan quickly tried to explain himself, telling her that it was not what he had meant at all. He assured her that it was simply a matter of his personal preference and had nothing to do with whether she was attractive or not. While trying to clarify his words, he admitted that the type of woman he was attracted to was someone older than himself. He explained that he admired women who possessed both beauty and maturity while still maintaining an innocent side to their personality. As Harin listened to his description, she quietly thought to herself that the kind of woman he was describing sounded strangely similar to her own mother. The thought immediately startled her, and she quickly told herself that she should not be thinking such ridiculous things. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the house, Eun-young had just finished her yoga session. As she relaxed after exercising, her thoughts gradually drifted toward Harin and Joan, who were now alone together in the room. She began wondering whether Harin was managing the situation well after everything that had happened the previous day. She also thought that it must have been somewhat uncomfortable for Harin to be alone with a young man after such an awkward incident. The more she thought about it, the more curious she became. She wondered whether there might be something the two of them felt uncomfortable discussing during the tutoring session. Her mind then wandered to the older man Harin had mentioned before, making her wonder if that person was truly involved in whatever Harin had been worried about. However, another possibility suddenly crossed her mind. She began wondering whether Jo-won might actually have feelings for Haran instead. The thought immediately filled her with uneasiness. Unable to ignore her curiosity any longer, Eun-young quickly hurried toward Haran's room. Once she reached the door, she quietly stopped outside and decided to listen to their conversation from the other side without letting either of them know that she was standing there. After the tutoring session had ended, Jo-won took out a donut. He gently encouraged her to eat it, hoping that it might help improve her mood after what had happened earlier. Haran looked at the donut before looking back at him and remarked that if he thought she was simply going to forget everything that had happened the previous day because of a donut, then he was completely mistaken. Jo-won gave an awkward smile and admitted that he already knew she was not the type of person who would let something like that slide so easily or forgive him for free. Even so, he still wanted her to accept the donut as a sincere apology. Meanwhile, Eun-young had quietly been standing outside the room, listening to their conversation without either of them realizing it. Since she had only overheard a small part of what they were saying, she completely misunderstood the situation. Her mind immediately jumped to the wrong conclusion, and she began thinking that she had trusted Jo-won with her daughter only to discover that her trust had been misplaced. The misunderstanding made her increasingly upset as she silently convinced herself that something inappropriate must have happened between the two of them. A short while later, Jo-won announced that it was time for him to leave and politely said that he would be heading home. As he stepped out of Haran's room, he expected Eun-young to at least acknowledge him or say goodbye. However, Eun-young completely ignored his presence as though he did not even exist. Without looking at him once, she simply asked Haran to wipe the dining table instead. As Haran moved toward the table, there was still some cream from the donut around the corner of her mouth. The moment Eun-young noticed it, she misunderstood the sight as well, thinking that it looked similar to a banana shake. That observation only strengthened the false assumptions she had already formed in her mind. On the other hand, Jo-won stood there looking completely confused by Eun-young's unusually cold behavior. He could not understand why she was suddenly treating him so differently. Nevertheless, realizing that she had no intention of speaking to him, he quietly left the house and returned home. Later that night, around dinner time, Eun-young was in the kitchen preparing dinner while waiting for her husband to come home from work. When he finally arrived, she immediately approached him because she had been waiting all day to discuss something important. She told him that she had been waiting for him because she needed to talk to him about Haran. However, before she could continue, her husband replied that he needed to change his clothes first after returning from work. Wanting him to understand the importance of the matter, Eun-young emphasized that what she wanted to discuss was about Haran. As she looked at him more carefully, she noticed just how exhausted he appeared after his work trip. His tired expression made her pause for a moment. After taking a shower, her husband came back looking even more drained than before. He remarked that they should simply go to bed because he was completely exhausted. Meanwhile, Eun-young had already changed into her workout clothes and was fully prepared for her exercise session. Her husband looked at her and lightly complimented her dedication before explaining that the business trip had been so exhausting that he could barely keep his eyes open. He apologized and told her that he was going to bed first. Eun-young once again tried to tell him that she really needed to discuss Haran with him, but before she could finish speaking, she noticed that he had already laid down on the bed and fallen asleep almost immediately. Watching him sleep, she quietly sighed to herself and thought that it always happened this way whenever he came home from work completely exhausted. No matter how important the matter was, he would always end up falling asleep before she had the chance to talk to him. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Jo-won was also at home preparing to go to bed. However, unlike usual, he could not relax because Eun-young's unusually cold behavior toward him kept replaying in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more restless he became. He wondered whether he had unknowingly done something wrong, but no matter how much he thought about it, he could not figure out the reason behind her sudden attitude. Unable to fall asleep, he eventually decided to step outside the apartment building to get some fresh air. As soon as he stepped outside, he happened to run into his landlady, who was also standing outside. The moment he approached her, he noticed the smell of alcohol and casually remarked that she smelled as though she had been drinking. She openly admitted that she had been drinking by herself and had already run out of alcohol. She then asked him whether he was heading somewhere. Jo-won replied that he had simply come outside because he could not sleep and wanted to get some fresh air. Upon hearing that, the landlady suggested that he accompany her to the nearby convenience store so she could buy more drinks. Jo-won agreed without much hesitation, and the two of them walked to the convenience store together. After purchasing several drinks, the landlady also picked up a helmet before paying for everything. Once they left the convenience store, they found a place outside where they could quietly sit together. They opened their drinks and began drinking while talking. After observing Jo-won's expression for a while, the landlady commented that he looked unusually upset. She casually told him that whenever life became overwhelming, having a drink sometimes helped a person forget their worries, even if only for a little while. Curious about his mood, she gently asked whether something had been bothering him. She even wondered if the problem might have something to do with a girlfriend and assured him that he could tell her anything if he wanted to. Juwan smiled bitterly before admitting that, even if he explained everything, it was the kind of situation that could never work out anyway. The landlady became even more curious and encouraged him to tell her everything. She confidently remarked that she had experienced almost every kind of relationship problem imaginable, so perhaps she could understand what he was going through. After remaining silent for a brief moment, Joan finally admitted that the biggest problem was the huge age difference between him and the woman he liked. Hearing that, the landlady laughed lightly and pointed out that there was also a significant age difference between the two of them. Jokingly, she suggested that he should simply pretend that she was the woman he liked and practice talking to her instead. Feeling slightly embarrassed, Joan admitted that he had never really thought that far ahead about what he would actually say or do. The landlady then suddenly suggested that the two of them should do a core training together instead. Joan agreed to the idea, but she added that they should go to her apartment for the stretching session rather than staying outside. During a relaxing stretch routine with his landlady, Joan suddenly received a phone call from him and Bake. He answered the call and informed her that he would be free the following day. After ending the conversation, he could not stop thinking about the incident on the bus and immediately recognized that Heeman was the same woman who had falsely accused him. Feeling uneasy, he wondered if she was planning to pick another fight with him when they met again. He then told his landlady that he was no longer in the mood for the upper-lower training and felt that it would be better for him to head back home. Without delaying any further, he gathered his belongings and quietly left. The following day, Joan arrived at the meeting place before the scheduled time and waited for Heeman on the street. As he stood there waiting, he kept looking around while thinking that she had said she would have arrived by then. After waiting for a short while, a car slowly pulled up beside him. Heeman rolled down the window and asked him to get inside. Joan opened the passenger door, got into the car, and took his seat beside her. As they began talking, Heeman explained that she had recently bought a new car because she had become completely exhausted from relying on public transportation. She admitted that almost every time she traveled by bus, there were men who tried to harass her, making her constantly feel unsafe. Because of those repeated experiences, she had immediately assumed that Juwan was just another man trying to take advantage of her. She sincerely apologized, admitting that she had made a serious mistake by judging him without knowing the truth. Joan looked at her and asked why she had suddenly decided to apologize after everything that had happened. Heeman honestly explained that she had received a phone call from a witness the previous day. According to the witness, Joan had never touched her during the bus incident. She admitted that she had absolutely no evidence against him, yet she had allowed her emotions to take over, jumped to conclusions, and publicly accused him without verifying the facts. She confessed that she now realized how unfairly she had treated him and deeply regretted her actions. Joan calmly replied that everything was fine now and that he had already moved on from the incident. However, Heeman still felt guilty and insisted that she wanted to do something to make up for the embarrassment she had caused him. She believed that being falsely accused in front of so many people must have been humiliating for him and felt that she should offer him some kind of compensation. Joan replied that if she truly wanted to make amends, they could simply settle the matter and leave everything behind. While they were still talking inside the car, Joan's attention suddenly shifted toward another vehicle parked nearby. He immediately recognized Sung Chan sitting inside it. As he looked more carefully, he was shocked to realize that Heron was with him once again. Seeing the two of them together immediately caught his attention. Without wasting another second, Joan urgently asked Heeman to follow Sung Chan's car. Hearing such an unexpected request, Heeman looked at him in confusion and pointed out that chasing another vehicle could easily become dangerous. Joan insisted that if she was unwilling to follow them, then he would drive the car himself. He immediately attempted to switch seats so that he could take control of the vehicle. However, Heeman quickly stopped him and remarked that if he seriously believed he would be able to drive properly in such a rushed and emotional state, then he was completely mistaken. After seeing how determined he was, she finally sighed and agreed to help him. She told him that she would follow the car for him as well. Joan sincerely appreciated her decision and thanked her before they began driving after Sungchan. Meanwhile, Haran was sitting beside Sungchan, feeling unusually happy. She could hardly believe that she was actually going on a drive with him. In her heart, she kept thinking that this time he had even asked her before bringing her along, making her believe that perhaps he had finally started showing genuine interest in her. Unable to hide her curiosity, she asked him whether they were heading somewhere special. Sungchan simply smiled and replied that he knew a place he wanted to show her. Hearing that answer only made Haran even more excited as they continued driving together. Following behind them from a safe distance, Joan carefully observed the direction in which Sungchan was driving. As they continued along the road, Joan realized that Sungchan was taking Harin toward a secluded area where very few people were around. Watching the route made him increasingly concerned, and he quietly remarked that Sungchan was taking Harin to an isolated place. After driving for some time, Sungchan finally stopped the car. He gently asked Harin to look outside the window. As she turned her head, she was greeted by the breathtaking sight of a beautiful sunset stretching across the sky. The peaceful scenery immediately captured her attention. Sung Chan told her that he had wanted to bring her there because he liked that place very much. Harin smiled warmly and commented that she absolutely loved the atmosphere there. As she admired the surroundings, she quietly thought to herself that it was an incredibly beautiful place. She also noticed how peaceful everything felt, since there was almost no traffic around at that hour, making the location even more relaxing. After allowing her to enjoy the view for a moment, Sung Chan told Harin that the place held many special memories for him. Hearing those words, Harin found herself thinking that he had a surprisingly emotional and sentimental side that she had never expected to see. However, Sung Chan's own thoughts were completely different from what he was showing on the outside. Deep inside, he admitted to himself that he certainly had many memories connected to that place, but those memories were not as meaningful as Harin imagined. He silently recalled that he had brought countless women there before and could not even remember how many of them had visited that same location. After a brief moment of silence, Sung Chan suggested that they perform mobility training together. Harin happily agreed without any hesitation, and the two of them got out and began exercising side by side. Not long afterward, Jo-won and Heeman finally arrived at the same location and quietly parked their car behind Sung Chan's vehicle. Remaining as discreet as possible, Jo-won carefully watched everything from a distance. Believing that the situation could become dangerous, he immediately took out his phone and began taking photographs of Harin and Sung Chan together inside the car, thinking that the circumstances were becoming increasingly concerning. As Jo-won continued watching Harin and Sung Chan from inside the parked car, Heeman quietly assumed that he had followed them because he wanted to interrupt them and ask Heeman to do strength conditioning instead. However, that was not what Jo-won intended to do. Unable to remain seated any longer, he suddenly opened the car door and stepped outside. Filled with concern, he insisted that he had to save his student before something went wrong. Before he could walk any farther, Heeman quickly got out of the car as well and stopped him. She warned him that if he approached them now, he would only end up looking like a strange man who was interfering with someone else's private moment. She pointed out that if Harin and Sung Chan genuinely liked each other, then there was nothing wrong with them spending time together. She further cautioned him that if he acted impulsively and confronted them, it could easily become the biggest mistake of his life. Jo-won listened to her words, but deep down he could not accept them. He kept thinking that she expected him to simply stand there and watch everything happen without doing anything, but he felt that he could never allow that. Meanwhile, Sung Chan happened to notice Jo-won and Heeman standing outside their car in the distance. The moment he recognized them, he immediately realized that they had followed him. Feeling irritated, he silently thought that those two had come there only to ruin his plans. Without letting Harin notice his frustration, he calmly suggested that they should end their gym session for the day. He then told her that he thought it would be better if they left immediately. Harin did not question his sudden decision, and the two of them got back into the car and drove away. After some time, Sung Chan dropped Harin off outside her house. Although the evening had gone smoothly on the surface, Harin could not shake the uneasy feeling growing inside her. As she watched Sung Chan drive away, she quietly thought that something about the entire situation did not feel quite right. From a distance, Jo-won and Heeman remained inside their own car and watched Harin safely reach her house. Jo-won looked visibly frustrated after everything he had witnessed. Seeing his expression, Heeman finally asked whether Harin was actually his girlfriend. Jo-won immediately corrected her by reminding her that he had already explained the truth. He told her once again that Harin was only his student and that he was simply her English tutor. He then admitted that he had an extremely bad feeling about Sung Chan and could not trust him at all. Hearing his explanation, Heeman quietly reflected on his behavior. She found it strange that he was worrying so deeply about a girl who was not even his girlfriend. At that moment, she realized that she had completely misunderstood the kind of person Jo-won was. She sincerely admitted that she had judged him unfairly and told him that she would genuinely like the opportunity to get to know him better. After returning home, Harin quietly went inside and decided to take a shower. As the warm water ran over her, her mind replayed everything that had happened throughout the day. Meanwhile, Eun-young noticed that Harin had been in the shower much longer than usual. Becoming slightly concerned, she walked over and gently knocked on the bathroom door. A few moments later, Harin finally came out, but instead of responding to her mother, she silently ignored her and walked straight into her bedroom without saying a single word. Watching her daughter's unusual behavior, Eun-young became increasingly worried. She quietly thought that Harin had returned home much later than usual that day, making her wonder whether something unpleasant had happened. However, she also remembered how badly things had turned out the last time she had questioned Harin too much. Because of that memory, she convinced herself that constantly asking questions might only backfire again. Even so, she silently reminded herself that she would always be there for her daughter whenever she needed her. Inside her bedroom, Harin remained lost in her thoughts. She began going through her own private self-care routine while quietly talking to herself about Sung Chan and everything that had happened between them that day. Standing outside the room, Eun-young accidentally overheard part of what Harin was saying. Listening carefully, she found herself wondering about Sung Chan. Gradually, she began thinking that perhaps she had completely misunderstood the situation all along. She started believing that there might actually be nothing between Harin and Jo-won after all. Elsewhere, Sung-chan later continued his flexibility training with Seong-yi as if nothing unusual had happened. On the other hand, Ju-won was unable to stop thinking about Harin. The more he reflected on the day's events, the more worried he became. He quietly questioned why he was feeling so concerned about someone who was not even a member of his family. Nevertheless, he firmly believed that Eun-young deserved to know what was happening because Harin was her daughter, and she had every right to be aware of the situation. After reaching that conclusion, Jo-won picked up his phone and decided to call Eun-young. However, before he could contact her, a message from Heeman appeared on his screen. In the message, she admitted that things had become awkward between them the previous day and suggested that they should simply forget about it. Reading the message, Jo-won could not help thinking that she probably still believed Harin was his girlfriend or perhaps had misunderstood his relationship with her in some other way. The following morning, Eun-young's husband was getting ready to leave the house for work. As he prepared to go out, he announced that he would not be eating breakfast because he was in a great hurry. Eun-young immediately told him that he should at least eat something before leaving, but he did not respond to her concern. At that very moment, his phone received a message from Yewon. When he opened it, he saw that she had sent him a photograph of herself, instantly making him flustered. Afraid that Eun-young might notice, he hurriedly hid his phone. Trying to act naturally, he casually told Eun-young not to worry about him because he would eat something outside before quickly leaving the conversation. Eun-young quietly watched her husband leave the house and could not shake the feeling that he had been distancing himself from her lately. She felt as though he was deliberately avoiding her, yet she had no idea what was going through his mind or what was causing the sudden change in his behavior. At that moment, Harin came out of her room, ready to leave the house as well. Seeing her daughter, Eun-young gently stopped her and said that she wanted to talk to her for a moment. However, Harin showed no interest in having a conversation. Without even slowing down, she coldly told her mother not to worry about her and instead advised her to keep an eye on her own husband. After saying those words, Harin immediately left the house, leaving Eun-young standing there in silence. Harin's comment only made Eun-young even more confused and troubled, as she wondered what her daughter had meant by those words. After being left alone at home, Eun-young stood in front of the mirror and looked at her reflection. As she examined herself, she remembered that she was still wearing the same dress she had worn the previous day. She quietly thought that perhaps she should go shopping, buy some new clothes, and spend a little time outside to clear her mind. Hoping that a change of atmosphere would help her feel better, she got herself ready and headed to a shopping mall. While walking through the mall, Eun-young unexpectedly came across Jo-won. He greeted her and explained that he had merely been passing by and was glad that they had met by chance. He then told her that there was something important he wanted to discuss with her and politely asked whether she had some free time. Eun-young replied that she did because she had come there to do some shopping. Since they had already met, she suggested that they shop together before discussing whatever he wanted to tell her. Jo-won agreed, and the two of them entered one of the clothing stores together. Inside the store, Eun-young looked through several outfits before selecting 2 dresses that caught her attention. She then told Jo-won that she was going to try them on and walked into one of the fitting rooms. While changing, she suddenly realized that the zipper of one of the dresses had become stuck and she was unable to pull it up by herself. After struggling for a moment, she decided to send Jo-won a message explaining that she was in trouble and asking him to come to the fitting room to help her. After receiving her message, Jo-won quietly walked over to the fitting room and went inside to assist her. Seeing that the zipper had become completely stuck, he carefully helped her pull it up so that she could properly wear the dress. While Jo-won was still inside the fitting room helping her, one of the store employees approached from outside and politely asked Eun-young whether she needed any assistance. Not wanting the employee to find out that Jo-won was inside the fitting room with her, Eun-young immediately replied that everything was fine and that she did not need any help. The employee accepted her answer and walked away. After making sure no one was around, Jo-won quietly stepped out of the fitting room. Looking at Eun-young, he asked whether she had decided which dress she wanted to buy. She replied that she had already made her choice. Once they had finished shopping, Eun-young reminded Jo-won that he had wanted to tell her something important earlier. Jo-won nodded and explained that the matter was related to Harin. The two of them then moved to a quieter place where they could talk comfortably without being interrupted. Jo-won began by asking Eun-young whether she already knew about the boy Harin had been seeing. Eun-young listened carefully as he continued speaking. He admitted that he did not think the boy was a suitable person for Harin. Although he felt awkward saying such things, he explained that he had personally witnessed the boy becoming increasingly close to Harin while they were inside the car together. He also revealed that he had followed them and had seen them stop in a secluded area where they spent time alone. Jo-won expressed his concern by saying that he believed it would be extremely dangerous for Harin to remain alone with someone like him in such an isolated place. He genuinely feared that something bad could happen if she continued spending time with that man. Before Eun-young could fully respond to everything he had told her, Jo-won's phone suddenly rang. He apologized and answered the call. On the other end of the line was his landlady, who sounded extremely panicked. She urgently told him that there was a serious problem at her house and that she desperately needed his help right away. After ending the call, Jo-won found himself in an awkward situation. He felt guilty about leaving Eun-young in the middle of such an important conversation, but he also believed that he could not ignore his landlady's request for help. Thinking that it would only become more awkward if he stayed any longer, he apologized to Eun-young and explained that something urgent had suddenly come up, so he had to leave immediately. Without wasting any more time, he hurried away. Eun-young quietly watched Jo-won leave and remained standing there by herself. She found the entire situation rather awkward. She could not help thinking that she had just discussed her own daughter's problems with Jo-won instead of with her husband. The thought made her feel disappointed because Haren's father showed so little interest in his own daughter. Even so, she tried to convince herself that perhaps he was simply too busy with work to pay proper attention to the family. Meanwhile, Jo-won quickly arrived outside his landlady's house, expecting to deal with a serious emergency. The moment he arrived, his landlady rushed over to him, looking completely frightened. She hurriedly explained that she had been taking a shower when she suddenly spotted a huge cockroach inside the house. She admitted that she was too terrified to deal with it by herself and had immediately called him for help. Hearing her explanation, Jo-won looked at her in complete disbelief, genuinely surprised that the emergency she had sounded so panicked about had turned out to be nothing more than a massive cockroach. After arriving at his landlady's house, it soon became clear to him that she was terrified of bugs, and that was the only reason she had urgently asked him to come over. Trying to reassure her, he calmly told her not to worry and said that he would search the house and get rid of the cockroach for her. As Jo-won began looking around the house, he suddenly noticed that his landlady was not properly dressed because she had rushed out in panic after seeing the insect. The sight immediately made him uncomfortable, and without meaning to, his thoughts drifted toward Eun-young. He quickly tried to avoid looking at his landlady in order to prevent any awkwardness. A few moments later, his landlady suddenly spotted the cockroach crawling on one of the walls. The instant she saw it, she screamed in fear, ran straight toward Jo-won, and tightly hugged him out of panic. Jo-won was completely caught off guard by her sudden reaction, but understood that she was genuinely frightened. After she had finally calmed down, she cheerfully suggested that they should do a core training together. Jo-won was not particularly interested because he had only come to help her deal with the cockroach. However, she continued insisting over and over again, refusing to give up. Unable to reject her repeated requests any longer, Jo-won eventually gave in and agreed to have the stretching session with her. The following day, Jo-won went to Haren's house as usual to give her English tuition. When he arrived, Eun-young opened the front door and welcomed him inside. However, she immediately informed him that Haren had still not returned home and that she had not heard from her either. Jo-won looked concerned and admitted that he had also been trying to contact Haren but had been unable to reach her. Just then, Jo-won's phone suddenly rang. Seeing that the call was from Haren, he immediately answered it. Haren told him that she wanted to postpone that day's lesson because she was busy with an urgent matter and would not be able to attend the tuition session. At that very moment, Haren was actually with Sung-chan, and the two of them were performing a gym session together. As Haren was ending the call, she accidentally dropped her phone before completely disconnecting it. Because of that, the call remained connected without her realizing it. Jo-won and Eun-young could both hear voices coming from the other side of the line. They immediately realized that Haren was talking to a man. Growing suspicious, they repeatedly called out her name and asked who she was with. However, Haren never responded because she had no idea that the call had not actually ended and that they were still listening to everything happening around her. Becoming increasingly concerned, Jo-won turned to Eun-young and asked whether there was anyone close to Haren who might be able to help separate her from that man or convince her to leave him. After thinking for a moment, Eun-young replied that Haren's best friend, Song-yi, might be able to help. She explained that Song-yi was very close to Haren and would probably know more about the boy she had been spending time with. Without wasting any time, Eun-young immediately called Song-yi and explained the entire situation. After listening carefully, Song-yi replied that she might actually know where Haren was. She assured Eun-young not to worry and promised that she would personally go and bring Haren back herself. After hearing Song-yi's response, Jo-won told Eun-young that although he was not sure whether he would be of much help, he would still look around and try to find Haren as well. He felt that sitting still and doing nothing would only make him even more anxious. While they were discussing what to do next, Eun-young suddenly received a message from an unknown phone number. Curious, she opened it without hesitation. The moment she looked at the message, her expression completely changed. She was shocked to see a photograph of an unfamiliar young woman wearing revealing clothing. Along with the picture, there was another message claiming that her husband was currently in the shower and that the woman was with him. Reading those words left Eun-young completely devastated. She felt deeply hurt and overwhelmed by the shocking message. Unable to control her emotions, she quietly reached for a drink and began drinking in an attempt to cope with what she had just seen. Watching her reaction, Jo-won misunderstood the reason for her distress. since he had no idea about the message she had received. He assumed that she was simply heartbroken because of Haren's situation. Song Yi eventually managed to find Haren and met up with her. After confirming that Haren was safe, she immediately called Eun-young to reassure her. She explained that Haren was perfectly fine and that there seemed to have been a misunderstanding. Hearing this, Eun-young felt somewhat relieved and said that she wanted to speak with Haren herself. However, Song Yi gently explained that Haren looked extremely shocked and emotionally overwhelmed at the moment. She assured Eun-young that Haren would call her herself after she had calmed down. After saying that, Song Yi ended the call. Once the phone call was over, Haren looked at Song Yi and quietly remarked that her mother must have been very surprised and worried because of everything that had happened. Song Yi replied that she had told Eun-young exactly what Haren wanted her to say. However, she admitted that she still wanted to ask one important question. Looking at Haren with genuine concern, Song Yi asked whether she was truly all right. Haren admitted that she had indeed been spending time with Sung-chan and that it had all been her own decision. She then confessed that she had never actually liked him in the first place. Instead, she had intentionally approached him because she had heard that he was popular with girls and was known for attracting a lot of female attention. She explained that she had only wanted to gain some experience for herself out of curiosity. However, after spending time with him, she realized that the experience had not been enjoyable at all. Because of that, she had already decided that she would stop seeing Sung-chan from that day onward. Having said everything she wanted to say, Haren quietly left and headed back home. Meanwhile, Eun-young had become heavily intoxicated after drinking far more than she normally would. Seeing her condition, Jo-won gently supported her and encouraged her to go to her room so she could get some proper rest. Since she was barely able to walk steadily, he carefully helped her to her bedroom and gently laid her down on the bed. As he watched her fall asleep, he quietly thought that she must have been completely overwhelmed with worry over Haren's safety and that all the stress had finally caught up with her. Believing there was nothing more he could do, Jo-won softly told the sleeping Eun-young that he would be leaving now before quietly making his way out of the house. At the same time, Haren was walking back toward her home. As she approached the entrance, she found herself thinking about everything that had happened earlier that day. She admitted to herself that it had been her first time ever having mobility training with the help of a man. Even so, she kept telling herself that she needed to stop thinking about Sung-chan because there was no point dwelling on someone she no longer intended to see. Just before entering the house, Haren unexpectedly saw Jo-won coming out of the front door. Neither of them had expected to run into the other, and they accidentally bumped into each other. Jo-won immediately looked at her with concern and asked whether she was really all right. Instead of answering his question directly, Haren asked whether he was free at that moment. She suggested that they could simply have their English lesson right then, instead of postponing it any longer. Jo-won shook his head and told her that the lesson was not important at that moment. He explained that her mother had been extremely worried about her all day and that she should go inside the house first. Before he could leave, Haren suddenly reached out and grabbed his hand to stop him. Looking at him seriously, she insisted that it was a special lesson and that they absolutely needed to do it that day. She then declared that they were going to his place instead. Hearing her unexpected suggestion, Jo-won immediately became hesitant. He awkwardly admitted that his house was not clean and tried to discourage her from coming over. In reality, he simply had an uneasy feeling about the situation and sensed that taking her there might create unnecessary misunderstandings. Despite his hesitation, Haren remained determined, and the two of them eventually headed to his house together. As they entered the building, Jo-won's landlady happened to notice them from a distance. The moment she saw Jo-won bringing a young woman into his home, she was immediately taken by surprise. Quietly watching them, she could not help thinking that Jo-won had actually brought a girl to his apartment. After entering the house, Jo-won tried to focus on the reason they had come there. He calmly asked Haren to take out her notebook so they could begin the lesson. However, instead of opening her notebook immediately, Haren decided to speak honestly about everything that had happened. She admitted that Jo-won had warned her to be careful around certain boys, but she had ignored his advice. Looking back on everything, she confessed that he had been right to worry about her. Even so, she explained that she did not regret having the opportunity to spend time with Sung-chan because the experience had helped her understand her own feelings. She continued by saying that, after thinking carefully about it, she realized she had never actually liked Sung-chan. The truth was that she had only been curious about him, and once that curiosity disappeared, so did any reason to continue seeing him. Haren then looked directly at Jo-won and told him that he did not have to feel guilty about anything because none of what had happened was his fault. After clearing up those feelings, she hesitated for a brief moment before making one final request. She shyly admitted that there was something she wanted to ask of him. She then revealed that she wanted to have strength conditioning with him instead. Hearing such an unexpected request completely caught Jo-won by surprise, leaving him speechless as he tried to process what she had just said.